Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. Good afternoon, dear guests. So may I declare the meeting of the Dissertation Board open to review the dissertation by Kamil Akhmadeev, submitted in fulfillment of a PhD in Political Science 23000 to Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies under the title Crimean-Tatar Community of Modern Russia, the Problem of Self-Determination. Declare open. According to the decree of St. Petersburg State University 12916/1, December 28, 2018, me, Galina Gribanova, professor of St. Petersburg State University, Doctor of Political Sciences, was appointed to be the chair of this dissertation board. May I introduce my colleagues: Anna Volkova, Doctor of Political Sciences, Assistant Professor, Public Policy Department, St. Petersburg State University; Tatiana Kulakova, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of Public Policy Department, St. Petersburg State University; Beltash Karipov, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor, Walikhanov, Kokshetau University, the Republic of Kazakhstan; Igor Kuznetsov, Doctor of Political Sciences, Lomonosov, Moscow State University, is absent due to important prior commitments. First and foremost, I would like to note that according to federal law 127FZ, as of August 23, 1996, federal law on science, research and development policy in Russia, St. Petersburg State University was granted an exceptional right to award academic degrees. A relevant decree on awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg State University was issued, which is at the backdrop of this dissertation board. It was issued under the number 6821/1 as of September 1, 2016. According to this decree, the meeting of the dissertation board is considered legitimate if participated by less than 2/3 of the appointed composition, but no less than 4 members. Our dissertation board has 4 members, so the quorum is there. I would like to announce the following rules of procedure. The meeting must last no more than 2 hours. The first is a short report of the chair on the documents submitted by the defendant, whether these documents are in compliance with the requirements, Q&A session, a brief report by the defendant on the key results of the research, questions to the defendant, no more than 2 minutes per questions, and to be followed by defendant's replies. Members of the dissertation board taking turns in declaring their positions, announcing their suggestions, contributions, and questions to the defendant, no more than 10 minutes per speaker. The chair of the dissertation board announcing his review, replies of the defendant to the questions pronounced by members of the dissertation board, an open discussion, asking questions, suggestions, commitments, strictly according to the topic of the research, no more than 5 minutes per speaker. All those wishing to take the floor, may I urge to register in advance in a specific list. Please introduce yourself before taking the floor. Defendant's replies, no more than 5 minutes. Defendant's research supervisor, no more than 3 minutes. 5 minutes discussion before open voting on whether pass or fail. The discussion of the members of the dissertation board is not broadcasted. Open voting by name, calculation of votes by the chair of the dissertation board, and registering the results in the protocol. Decision-making on whether pass or fail and the defendant's concluding remarks, no more than 2 minutes. That's the procedure. Before implementing the procedure, I would like to remind you to switch off your mobile devices. Thank you for compliance. I would like to inform you that there is audio-visual recording as well as live broadcasting at St. Petersburg State University website. Simultaneous interpretation from English to Russian, from Russian into English is also there. May I now initiate the procedure? The first point is the chairman's brief report. Distinguished chair, 1 minute. Just a minute. It's not the hard time for you to take the floor. You will take the floor a little bit later. I'm sorry. So the defendant, Kamil Akhmadeev, has submitted his research in the specialty field 230002 Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies under the title Crimean-Tatar Community of Modern Russia, the Problem of Self-Determination. The dissertation has been accepted by the R&D Secretary of St. Petersburg State University on December 28, 2018. Under the Decree 12915/1, the composition of the dissertation board was appointed by the Decree 12916/1 as of December 28, 2018. The defendant has submitted to the Scientific Secretary of St. Petersburg State University the following documents: an application addressed to Rector Kropotchev to allow the defense of the dissertation as of September 12, 2018. The review of the research supervisor, Professor Alexander Kurochkin. A list of publications reflecting the key findings of the dissertation. 4 papers are published in peer-reviewed journals included in the list of Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation, and the journals are included in Scopus and Web of Science databases. Certificate 04A339 certifying that Mr. Akhmadeev, since September 1, 2014 until August 18, 2015, has studied in the postgraduate department of St. Petersburg State University under the program MK 330 2014 Political Sciences, to be followed by exams journalism, history of philosophy and science, B, foreign language, English, and political institutions and technologies, A, respectively. To be followed by the diploma on completing the postgraduate degree and the dissertation in soft and hard copies, drawn in accordance with GOST R70, printed on paper according to GOST R704. I should note that all the documents listed are completely in compliance with Section 12 on academic degrees awarding procedure in St. Petersburg State University. Appendix number 1 to the decree. And now I would like to give the floor to the defendant for a short report on his dissertation. You have 15 minutes. Distinguished Chair of the Dissertation Board, distinguished members of the Dissertation Board, distinguished participants and guests. I would like to suggest to you my dissertation submitted in compliance with the PhD in Political Science under the title Crimean-Tatar Community of Modern Russia, the Problem of Self-Determination. The multitude of ethnic groups at the Crimean Peninsula is a factor that determines active political processes on this territory. The history of Crimea ensured radical inter-ethnical, inter-religious contacts, and the geographical position of the peninsula actually identifies the political, military, strategic, and economic importance for this region. So this region is highly relevant for Russian civilization. The events that happened at the peninsula in 2014 impacted largely the dynamics of ethno-political processes, making them largely ambiguous. One of such processes is the position of Crimean-Tatar communities that are highly mobilized. And this actually makes my research ever more relevant. Ethnicity, inter-ethnic and state-ethnic relations, ethnogenesis, are largely reviewed in papers by Max Weber, Vladimir Lenin, Ludwig Gumplovich, Julian Bromley, Joseph Rothschild, and so many others. The sociobiological aspect is reviewed in Leo Gumilov's, Sergei Shorokogorov's, Pierre van den Berthe, and Tato van Hanen papers. The second part of the 20th century, national ethnic movements in Africa, Asia, Latin America, has drawn extensive focus to the dismay of colonial empires. Let's go back to the history of USSR, which actually made this problem ever more relevant. Ernest Gellner, Anthony Smith, Benedict Anderson, Lee Grenfell, Miroslav Groch, Boyd Schaeffer, Thomas Eriksson, Craig Calhoun, Rogers, Brubaker, and so many others have suggested methodology to review these processes. Valery Tishkov, Ramazan Abdullatipov, Anatoly Avksentiev, Leokadin Drobyshev, Ayrat Aklaev, Victoria Koroteva, Galina Soldatova are the ones to follow in Russia. One of the first researchers was Denis Dragunsky, who offered his interpretation of ethnopolitical processes. These processes are identified as large sweeping processes that are implemented on a large scale that are characterized by ethnic identity on the one hand and sovereignty on the other hand. Keeping the national identity in the multi-global world is the key focus of Valery Achkasov, who is also the author of a textbook on ethnopolitology. Vladimir Popov focuses on the relations between politics and ethnopolitology. In the West, these issues were extrapolated in papers by Karl Deutsch, Frederick Barth, who interpreted ethnic mobilization as a factor that resulted in large-scale violence, Miroslav Groch, who suggested a three-stage model of ethnopolitical mobilization to describe the genesis of national movements in Central and Southeastern Europe, to be followed by Susan Olzak, Joe Nagel, who identified social and economic changes in the societies as a factor of ethnopolitical mobilization, as well as the papers by Michael Gluboglu, Valery Achkasov, Zinaida Sikevich, and so many others, who identified the negative impact of the ethnic factors on the social well-being. Emil Pine, who suggested the idea of an ethnopolitical pendulum. Alexei Malashenko is another person to be mentioned in this litany of researchers. As for Crimean-Tatar ethnopolitical issues, I should note papers by Michael Gluboglu, Svetlana Chervona, Gulnara Berikova, Vladimir Mokomela, and Sergei Haikin, as well as Roman Starchenko, Elmira Muratova, Natalia Kiselova, Alexander Fomanchuk, Andrei Malgin, Vadim Petrov, Yevgenia Rozgina, Oleg Raptsev, and so many others, as well as Jane Dawson, Ellen Fisher. However, most of them overlook the issue of the recent changes. Therefore, the main objective of my research is to analyze the theory and methodology of Crimean-Tatar ethnopolitical processes. This is the first one. The second objective is to investigate political, legal, social and cultural institutions of Crimean-Tatar community, as well as their relation to contemporary phenomena. Third, to identify the specific features of Crimean-Tatar ethnopolitical processes, to perform a comparative analysis of ethnopolitical mobilization of Crimean-Tatar ethnic communities across different historical periods, starting from 1944. Objective number 5, to analyze values and reasons behind ethnopolitical mobility of Crimean-Tatar community, as well as to analyze the structure of their identity after 1944. The object of my research is Crimean-Tatar ethnic community and political process, and the subject of my research is the dynamics. The basic methodology is the interdisciplinary approach, as well as empirical, psychological, historical, and comparative methods. The empirical method is demonstrated by the database, an extensive database of field research, focus groups, expert interviews, which allowed me to analyze the political culture and behaviors of Crimean-Tatar ethnic communities. This method is highly efficient to suggest explanations. It is also important because it allows us to compare the political culture of an ethnic group to the general political and cultural values of other ethnic groups interacting with the ethnic group under research. The history of Crimean Peninsula actually identified our choice and determined it. The psychological method analyzes the specific behavioral patterns of political readers, political institutions, and as well as specific political actions of ethnic societies. This method is highly efficient to analyze the historic memory of Crimean-Tatar communities in modern Russia. The historical and comparative methods, description, comparison, retrospective approaches, is based on comparison between contemporary ethnopolitical phenomena to their history. This allows us to establish a historical perspective and historical context. We start from 1940s until present. A key focus is the time span as of 2014 until present, due to the escalation of ethnopolitical processes in Crimean Peninsula. The key findings of my research can be used to optimize political and administrative transformations in Crimean Peninsula, as well as in drawing documents and laws. The findings of my research could be exciting for the scientific and academic community, as well as for public authorities. The results of my research can also be used in education, thus providing for some specific courses or programs like ethnopolitology, political regional studies, and so many others. The practical relevance of my research is that a historical and comparative approach allowed us to study the ethnopolitical mobilization of Crimean-Tatar ethnic communities, as well as in the time before 2014, as well as after that year. That allows us to analyze the factors that impacted the history and the mobility of the society. This research allowed me to produce the key findings of my dissertation. They are as follows. First, a key ethnopolitical event of the year 2014 was the destruction of interethnical relations, escalation of xenophobia, reduction of mixed marriages, as well as mistrust to other ethnic groups. Second, the Crimea joining Russia resulted in stronger bonds across members of Crimean-Tatar community. This actually fueled consolidation. And this is demonstrated by changed attitudes to Muslim groups and other religious groups. Third, starting from 1783, when Crimean Peninsula has joined the Empire of Russia, the aboriginal population was actually ousted out from the Crimean Peninsula, which actually is highly relevant for the historical memory of the Crimean-Tatar ethno-community. The events of 2014 have transformed dramatically the structure and the relations across ethno-religious communities, including Crimean-Tatar community. Despite consolidation and stronger bonds, today Crimean-Tatar ethnic communities are highly exposed to political competitions and other ethnopolitical factors. Six, Crimean-Tatar ethnic community is a politically mobilized community, which demonstrates that they have the same values and they are ready to preserve or even to explore other ethnic patterns that are most relevant for their group. Number 7, ethno-demographics and socio-cultural specifics of the Crimea actually justifies the voting mechanisms that are now implemented in the Crimea. Distinguished members of the Dissertation Board, I have finished my report and now I'm ready to take your questions. Thank you. Questions, please. Anna Volkova. Well, it's well known that the formation of values implies conflicts and contradictions. To you, what are the value conflicts or ambiguous values that are most relevant for further development of the Crimean Peninsula as part of Russian Federation? Thank you very much for the question, Madam Volkova. It is not an easy question, indeed. Well, it seems to me that all of us have one and the same value, which is to preserve peace. So it is the preservation of peace that is behind of all values. At the same time, there are specific perceptions that impact the formation of values and their formulation. One of such perceptions is the perception of being the aboriginal population of the Crimean Peninsula, which actually is the reason behind a specific value scale and the pursuit to have some government, a specific government that this particular community considers to be their territory, the territory that they own. Tatiana Kulakova, have you considered, after you have done the practical part of your research, have you considered the institutions that allows Turkey to exercise impact on the self-determination, self-identification of Crimean-Tatar community? Thank you, Professor Kulakova, for your question, which is about, if I'm right, the political perceptions of Turkey about Crimean-Tatar communities after the events of 2014? Well, actually, this question echoes the question that is in the report, in which I'm going to provide an answer. Actually, the official position of Turkey is ambiguous. It is half here, half there. On the one hand, Turkey acknowledges the integrity of Ukraine, supporting different agents of Crimean-Tatar community and ethno-political movements that have not acknowledged Russia. However, Turkey did not join in the sanctions because actually the economic cooperation with Russia, between Turkey and Russia on the one hand and between Turkey and Ukraine on the other hand, is uncomparable. My question, could you please formulate briefly the advantages and disadvantages of Ukrainian policy with respect to Crimean-Tatar community in the times when Crimea belonged to Ukraine? What was right, what was wrong to you? Thank you for this question. Well, definitely. This question compels me to give an elaborate answer. However, if I have to be concise, I would like to note that the policy of Ukrainian government across all the times, starting from 1990s, was different. Kuchma, Presidents Kuchma and Yushchenko was very much careful about issues related to Crimean-Tatar communities, which is demonstrated by their political actions. But like there was a specific presidential board bringing together all members of Mejlis. However, President Yanukovych actually became less focused on this issue, ousting out Crimean-Tatar communities out of the political agenda. I think the reason behind that is that during elections, the Crimean-Tatar community is an organization that was banned in Russia, were against Yanukovych. And therefore, the negative attitudes fueled by this rejection, it was sort of political revenge, I think. This is what stands for political aspects. I believe that you would like also to find out more about social and economic perspective. Well, nothing is easy there because the geographical names, traditional geographical names, the territory, all that together, it was indeed a painful issue that fueled conflicts across all ethnic groups living in Crimea. This can be explained by a very thoughtless governmental policy or lack of finance. Overall, I should note that, and this is what I'm going to reiterate further down, the Crimean-Tatar community participated actively in promoting public institutions, which explains the ambiguity of their civil identification. Well, I would like to highlight that formally Crimean-Tatar community identify themselves with the Ukraine. However, their values are more Russian-oriented. And I would like to proceed to declaring the reports by members of the Dissertation Board, and the Chair would like to give the floor to Doctor of Political Sciences Anna Volkova, Public Policy Department, St. Petersburg State University. You have 10 minutes. Distinguished colleagues, my report is presented at St. Petersburg State University website. Therefore, would like to focus on the keynote aspects of my report that make this research so valuable and also are matters for discussion. The choice of the topic is indeed innovative, and this is a painful issue for Russia because Crimea is a concentration of multiple ethnic groups that have very ambiguous and very painful historical, economical development. Crimea is indeed special in terms of geopolitics, and it is a highly relevant region for many cultures, many nations. Therefore, we have to consider the perspective of how all these ethnic groups are going to interact and coexist there. The focus on values and reasons driving the actions make this dissertation highly relevant and worthy. As for the importance of the key findings, I believe that the key value of this dissertation is case analysis. And the defendant arrives at indeed original results, bringing together political theories in ethnic processes and regional practices. The defendant describes the Crimean-Tatar community, analyzes their values, which allows the defendant to define the Crimean-Tatar case as a transition. And the members of the institutions responsible for this ethnic group have a most pivotal role. The defendant, in many details and diligently describes how unique the Crimean-Tatar community is, identifying potential perspectives for further ethnopolitical processes development. And this actually provides the authorities with a relevant context so as to adjust the policy implemented in this region. The research identifies the key parameters of Crimean-Tatar community, the relations with the political life of the region, which can be highly relevant for Russia, both in the Crimea in terms of its presence in the Crimea and universally. Chapter 4 fuels utmost discussion because it is so rich with findings and practical issues. The defendant focuses on the events of 2014, which actually has escalated and subverted the disintegration processes across different ethnic groups existing in the Crimea. The events of 2014 impacted largely on the distribution of powers on the regional level, the restructurization, and broadly the impact on the Muslim communities, with the transformed political and legal powers. It's so grateful to see that all the processes are demonstrated as complicated ones, and the findings are valuable, therefore. The dissertation is indeed original. The defendant analyzes legal documents of different historical times, and this makes this dissertation so unique because it brings together documents and evidence of several epochs, several states and governments in historical perspectives. Indeed, the results are highly practical and efficient for regional development within the political theory and other disciplines. The defendant has successfully proved that to have an efficient political strategy, the public authorities must consider ethnopolitical mobility of a specific ethnic group. This is one of the most pivotal findings of the dissertation. Any dissertation is a conclusion, though there are some points to criticize, because there are other issues raised that remain unanswered and allow us for further discussion. I would like to focus on the methods. When the author mentions the empirical or the psychological approach, I should note that one of the advantages of the dissertation is that it is integral. It is well-founded, and this is indeed true. This does not invalidate the findings of the dissertation. I also would like to note that some chapters are less extensive than the others. For example, let's look at chapter 3. It is so extensive and bulky and actually subverts the balance of the dissertation. The first chapter, on the other hand, is very slim. There is yet another point that seems to be relevant to me, and I would like the defendant to consider this in his future research. You use such notions as Crimean-Tatar community, Crimean-Tatar society, Crimean-Tatar ethnic group. However, I don't think that you discern clearly across these concepts. Therefore, I would like to suggest that your dissertation is not about political theory. It is largely about identifying some transformations in the society overall. So you should better discern across these concepts. And next, your statement that ethnic self-identification of Crimean-Tatar community implies that ethnopolitical processes should be studied by way of history. I think that this is something arguable, because this theory is quite often used to manipulate the public perceptions. And this is true not only about Crimean-Tatar community, but largely about the public in general. So the same event in history could be considered both as pain and glory. Therefore, I would like you to be careful about such statements. However, I believe that all these points of criticism do not invalidate the research, and the defendant, Kamil Akhmadeev, deserves to be awarded the aspired academic degree, whereas his dissertation is in conformity with all the requirements under the relevant decree of St. Petersburg State University, whereas the defendant, Kamil Akhmadeev, deserves to be awarded the aspired academic degree in specialty field 230002. Thank you, Anna. Kamil, are you going to reply to every speaker? Yes, I will. Then the floor is yours. Please be short. Thank you very much, Professor Volkova. Thank you so much for the valuable points of criticism. I'll try to provide my responses. Well, yes, indeed, my dissertation is a case study. I'd rather agree with you that I should have noted this in the methods, in describing my methods. This is a comprehensive research of a specific problem. However, I failed to reside to one specific concept. Therefore, I had to engage other methodologies and approaches. And this makes this field even more extensive and complicated. Thank you for that. As for the bulky third chapter and the slim first chapter, as you justly noted, I think that as soon as this is a case study, therefore, it is not the theoretical but the practical part that was the most extensive, analyzing the dynamics in Crimean-Tatar communities. Your next point was about formulations. I agree with you absolutely that I should have discerned across these concepts, and this is what is utterly important for any research. As for ethnic community, ethnic group, ethnic society, well, the difference across these notions is less than the difference between the ethnicity and nation. I would also add here that such categories as ethnic community are quite neutral when especially considering the arguments. Where does a specific group of people belong to? These concepts imply a sustainable group of people united by one specific feature. As for the diaspora, this is a specific research term which is limited by specific parameters, in particular the ethnic group that lives beyond its country of origin. Such a group was analyzed in Turkey, in contemporary Bulgaria, and Central Asian republics. And your last notion is the factors that are behind manipulative strategies. Thank you very much for this valuable, highly valuable notion, because this aspect is a matter of an independent research. Yes, indeed, manipulative factors are something that tempt contemporary societies. And therefore, our task is to identify where is the limit between relevant ethnopolitical processes and politicians just bargaining and making trade-offs. Anyway, the comprehensive study of this phenomena is required today, and I will follow this commitment. Once again, thank you very much for your recommendations. Now I would like to give the floor to Doctor of Political Sciences, Tatiana Kulakova, St. Petersburg State University. Thank you, Professor Gribanova. I'm not going to read out my report in full. I'd rather would like to observe the time limit, noting that the methods are quite sustainable and the methodology is comprehensive to review this phenomena from all aspects. On the other hand, I would like to note that the defendant referred to both Russian as well as international researchers who are very well known in their area and have contributed largely to politology, ethnology, ethnography, nationalism theory, and political mobilization. The defendant duly operates public speeches of politicians, documents, and opinion polls in Crimean-Tatar communities. I should note that the appendix to the dissertation is in conformity with the tasks and objectives. The bibliography is extensive, relevant. It reflects the key topics and matters of the research. We are very well informed about the relevance of this research and actually how painfully relevant it is. This is how I would like to put it. Because indeed your task was a huge challenge. It is very difficult to stay with academic science and methods and not to follow your emotions. So, but indeed you were tempted to do so, however you didn't. I should justly say that overall the produced dissertation, its objectives and tasks have been delivered in full. And there is enough evidence to prove your findings. However, I would like to focus on some critical points. Although you have already provided an answer to the questions on Turkish institutions and organizations and their impact on the self-determination of Crimean-Tatar communities, nevertheless, I would like to find out in more detail about how this impact is exercised in particular. Because actually, the sovereignty of Crimean-Tatar community under the Osmanian Empire is indeed there. Let's not forget that during the World War II, the Turkish direction was defended by 30 to 40 divisions of the Red Soviet Army. And actually, the perceptions of Crimean-Tatar community can be explained by the position of Turkey against this geopolitical setback. My second point is as follows. We should note that today's Crimean government is very flexible about Muslim organizations. This allows them actually to be flexible and to sustain the balance across different political and religious organizations, which on the other hand fuels the overproduction of other organizations that support the current government. Today there are over 30 social organizations. However, I think that you failed to demonstrate the variety of interactions, forms, as well as positions and viewpoints in the Crimean Peninsula across Crimean-Tatar community. I would like to know more about how these organizations contribute to consolidation at the peninsula, considering the fact that the Russian government that is actually responsible for what Catherine the Great did, or is responsible for Stalin's policy? Is it justified, or is it just sheer manipulation? I should note that the conflicts across different Muslim organizations are described and noted. I very much like that you decided to track that these organizations are a network. And I agree with Anna that the victimization is indeed a strange value to suggest and to impose on Crimean-Tatar community, because even amid harsh times, the Crimean-Tatar community were so integral, thus defending their consolidated self-determination. Therefore, what I would like to suggest is how to reinforce the bonds across this people and actually their values, how to make them stronger. And to this end, we have to consider specific levels on how to preserve the balance across the different ethnic and religious groups, preserving the consolidated Crimean-Tatar community in Crimean Peninsula. Question number 4. The specific aspects of ethnopolitical processes are explained by way of the ethnopolitical dynamics and the number of the population. Is it possible that the spiritual government of Crimean Muslims could oost out some specific aspects of historical memory of Crimean-Tatar community, or otherwise would it just fuel the ethnopolitical influence, expanding the ethnopolitical resource? What I'm highly interested is your perception of this issue, because you're an expert in this respect. Question number 5. To me, it would be favorable to be more accurate about your own opinions about Crimean-Tatar language as a state language, together with Russian and Ukrainian, as well as cultural and educational demands and satisfaction of these demands, and establishing a dialogue with the government by way of different institutions to integrate Crimean-Tatar communities in Russia in a better way. Next, despite the fact that you note that the ethnic consolidation has become weaker in the post-Soviet time, I believe that the higher distance and the xenophobia across different ethnic groups in Crimea, they lead me to my next question. What is the contribution of Crimean-Tatar community to the integrity of Crimea overall? Question number 7. For many times, you emphasize that Crimean-Tatar communities became more consolidated after the dismay of the Soviet Union. I believe that it started whimsically in 1964, and to be followed by the next wave before the demise of the Soviet Union in 1987, 1988. And actually, these waves of immigration were very well populated without causing any disputes or emotional disrespect or dissatisfaction. Because this territory was not under the sovereignty of the Soviet Union. Why do you insist, then, that the emotions, the emotional perceptions of Crimean-Tatar are more about the Ukraine than Russia? Is it the perception of Ukraine or Russian Federation? It's not quite clear. However, all these processes are very fascinating indeed. And my final question, I think, can we consider the Crimean-Tatar Mejlis and the governing authority of Muslims of the Crimea as the key institutions that are compelled to eliminate the consequences of genocide performed and executed by the Soviet Russia? Because indeed, Machiavelli was right that people do have a historical memory, and a nation would always remember the humiliation and offenses incurred. It is indeed a warning to contemporary governments and national structures that are trying to interfere. Anyway, the restitution of national political rights and the right for self-identification, the right for the national territory, is it the ultimate expression of amid contemporary ethnopolitical settings? Or is it political engineering and manipulation? This is an exciting issue, I think. Because we have not found an answer yet to it. It's not quite clear, although there are relevant institutions. Overall, the dissertation by Kamil Akhmadeev under the title Crimean-Tatar Community in Modern Russia, the Problem of Self-Determination, submitted in conformity with the PhD in Political Sciences under the specialty 230002, Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies, is in conformity with the key requirements put forward by the decree as of September 1, 2016, number 6821/1, whereas the defendant, Kamil Akhmadeev, deserves to be awarded despite academic decree under the specialty field 230002, the provision 11 is not violated. Distinguished Professor Kulakova, thank you so much for such a detailed report and all the points for criticism. Your questions are very elaborate. I'll try to give a short answer and a relevant one. Your first question was about the Turkish factor and their impact as a soft power on the ethnopolitical processes in Crimea and the perceptions of Russian Federation in this respect. Turkey as a soft power is based on two principles: protection and zero problems with neighbors. That was accepted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkey in 2011, so as to have peaceful relations with neighboring countries. Russia is a state with an extensive Turkish dimension. Russia and Turkey have long-standing relations including humanitarian relations that bring together Muslim religious territorial organization as well as the spiritual governance of Muslims. We have extensive lessons learned, such as the Turksoy project. On top of that, practically, humanitarian contacts across Turkish and Muslim components in Turkey and Russia allows us to reinforce bilateral political relations. Let's refer to the efforts of the spiritual institution of Muslims in the Russian Federation and the relevant institutions of Turkey when the tragedy with the Russian military plane happened in 2015. The next question is related to the potential established by the new government of Crimean-Tatar community to integrate Crimean-Tatar community with the Crimea. I totally agree that I should have extensively focused on the impact of such organizations. Once again, I would like to reiterate that this is an extensive topic and it deserves an elaborate research. Your next point and question is highly relevant. It was about the balance across all ethnic groups of Crimea. Interethnic harmony, to me, can be achieved by way of a diligent balance of interests, which is based on integral participation in political processes of all powers and stakeholders, governmental and non-governmental. The historical memory is something to be utterly careful about. The historical memory largely determines the perceptions of nations. Therefore, considering the historical memory is highly relevant for the future. Another question referred to oosting out some evictive aspects from the historical memory of Crimean-Tatar community. This is a valuable question deserving an independent analysis. I'll try to be as short as possible. My research found out that contemporary political situation implies polarization of different actors and stakeholders. The disposition of these actors is antagonistic versus the events of 2014, as well as others to follow. The spiritual institution of Crimean Muslims is one of the key organizations that is for Russia. The importance of this organization has rocketed after 2014. Another painful issue is the short distance, or rather the mistrust of Crimean-Tatar communities to governmental institutions. However, the House of Crimea will not be able to oost out the offenses and the humiliation from the historical memory of Crimea society. Those could undergo a transformation without being a reason for political trade-offs and political governing, which is viable unless the Crimean region becomes stronger, as well as a large-scale social and economic program that would promote historical and economic development of the region, including resolution on geographical names, political issues, and extensive political measures to expand and explore all the public languages in this region. This could be a worthy answer about the Crimean-Tatar language in education to satisfy the educational requirements of Crimean-Tatar community. Another question was about the Crimean-Tatar community as a key integration factor in Crimea. Historically, Crimea was subject to burning inter-ethnic, inter-civilizational contacts. Inter-ethnic community or unity is a vague notion. I think it is related to tolerance, inter-ethnic trust, so on and so forth. In this respect, I would like to state that Crimean-Tatar community has never been radical or extremist or terrorist. Therefore, Crimean-Tatar community is unlikely to be a challenge to ensure integrity of Crimea. At the same time, their priority is to defend their own national, cultural, and political rights, including right for self-identification. Therefore, their contribution to ensure Crimean integration is relevant. However, I believe that the key contribution should be made not by ethnic groups, rather by public bodies, authorities, who have relevant tools, political, economic, and legal tools. Any political resolution should consider the interests of all the nations and all the ethnicities living on the Crimean Peninsula. Therefore, this is what I mean by a balance of interest across all the ethnic groups. Your next question was about Crimean-Tatar immigration back to Crimea after the post-deportation period. Despite the first Crimean-Tatar communities returning back to Russia in the mid-1960s, they cannot say that this was a massive immigration. My research analyzes specific political and legal tools used by parties in this respect. Those who tried to relocate to Crimea in the 1960s had to settle down in border regions, whereas another large-scale immigration started in the end 1988. As for the ambivalence of civil self-identity of Crimean-Tatar community demonstrated by emotional loyalty to formerly Ukraine and actually Russia, so, well, there are pragmatic reasons behind that. First, by early 2012, Crimean-Tatar communities enjoyed a very specific position in economics and politics. Second, there is the Ukraine and its policy at the time of integration that was cherished by many Crimean-Tatar communities. Largely, this integration occurred at the time of sovereign Ukraine, which impacted the perception of Ukraine as a state that has acknowledged Crimean-Tatar communities. On top of that, Ukraine has intensively participated in constructing institutions on Crimean-Tatar territories. And your last question was about the claims of Crimean Tatars and whether these perceptions belong to the Crimean Tatar nation and not to the elite. I believe that it indeed belongs to the Crimean Tatar nation, although it could be used as a tool for political engineering and trade-offs. The pursuit towards self-identity was very typical to Crimean Tatar groups, long before some political factors. It was first suggested in 2014 as a national cultural autonomy, which is an exterritorial autonomy, and thus does not belong to the political process. I doubt it's going to be supported by the majority of Crimean-Tatar community just due to the historical background and their pursuit for an independent state. The second chapter analyzes basic characteristics of Crimean-Tatar community so as to historically justify their claims for national governmental establishment. This does not mean independence. This could be a national territorial education within some specific macro government. Distinguished Professor Kulakova would like to extend my gratitude for the detailed review, for your criticism, and I'm going to keep it in mind in my further endeavors. Would you like to add something? Madam Kulakova would like to say thank you to the defendant for such precise answers to my questions. Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Doctor of Political Sciences, Baltash Karipov, Walikhanov, Kokshetau University. Professor Karipov, the floor is yours. Yes, please, you can go to the rostrum to read out your review. The speaker did not switch the mic. Interpreter cannot hear the distinguished professor. Please switch on the microphone to ensure interpretation. Well, this Kamil Nailevich Akhmadeev has submitted his dissertation under the specialty field 230002, Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies. This topic is highly relevant, especially amid the setback of spring 2014. The dissertation considers the bilateral relations as well as the events that fueled enormous responses of international communities. The dissertation is logical and consistent. The findings of the dissertation are very practical, and the dissertation includes 150 pages, including the bibliography and appendices. It is in conformity with all the requirements. The findings are very well justified because the methods are relevant and the bibliography of the dissertation is indeed extensive. The defendant analyzes statistical data and looks into opinion polls. The objectives of the dissertation are in conformity with the subject and object of research. The defendant cited 172 sources, which is more than enough. The novelty of the research is the historical and comparative approach, analyzing the ethno-political mobilization of Crimean-Tatar group as of 2014 and years to follow. The factors are extensively presented in the dissertation, as well as the external political stakeholders that impacted these processes. This allowed the defendant to come up with highly valuable findings about political and legal transformation of Crimean Peninsula. The theoretical value is the perception of ethno-political mobilization as a phenomena and the factors behind it. The practical efficiency of the dissertation is indeed reasonable and can be justified by the practical material used. This dissertation is of high value for the academia as well as the society overall. The key findings of the dissertation can be used in developing textbooks as well as educational courses on ethnopolitology and politology. Thus, the dissertation is a very comprehensive research devoted to one of the most burning issues of contemporary Russia. It has great logic and argumentation. The dissertation is unbiased, although the political tensions are indeed massive. Despite the valuable aspects of the research, I would like to focus on some points for criticism. The dissertation looks into ethno-political processes within Crimean-Tatar community. I would like to focus on the failing chronology. There is lack of objective data on social and economic situation in Crimean-Tatar communities, despite the demographics. The defendant should have looked into other statistical parameters that are relevant in economics. Despite the external political factors, such factors as the United Nations, the European Union, the US, and so many other stakeholders are overlooked and not included. These points of criticism do not invalidate the key findings of the dissertation. This dissertation is a huge contribution to science and the academic tradition, as well as the integration of Crimean-Tatar communities into Russian community. The key findings are reflected in papers as well as peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation. Therefore, the dissertation by Kamil Akhmadeev under the title Crimean-Tatar Community of Modern Russia, the Problem of Self-Determination in the specialty field 23002 is in conformity with the Decree 6821/1 as of September 1, 2016. And Kamil Akhmadeev deserves to be awarded the Inspired Academic Degree in Political Science. The defendant did not violate Provision 11 of the academic degrees awarding procedure. Thank you. Kamil, the floor is yours to provide responses. Distinguished Professor Karipov, thank you very much for your report and the points of criticism, as well as for your time for coming here and participating in the defense.
Замечание касалось недостаточности.
Well, your first question was about the lack of materials on ethnopolitical processes in the Ukrainian period. Well, I agree that this would make my dissertation ever more valuable if I had included this material and this data. However, I should note that the title of the dissertation, however, is about Crimean-Tatar community in the contemporary Russia, starting from 2014. Therefore, it was not my primary task to consider the Ukrainian period of Crimean-Tatar communities. Your next question was about lack of social and economic factor. Yes, indeed. A comprehensive research should include an elaborate analysis of social and economic position. However, my objective was not to analyze the social and economic factors. However, this factor had its impact on ethnopolitical processes and ethnopolitical mobilization of Crimean-Tatar communities nevertheless. Therefore, I absolutely agree with you that this is my failure, and I will compensate on it in my future research. So your last contribution was about the lack of stakeholders, international stakeholders, as potential factors. Well, I take it such an extensive analysis of international stakeholders would make my research more consolidated. At the same time, I would like to note that on the local ethno-political scale, the impact of these international stakeholders should be reviewed in terms of their dynamics. I believe that I would compensate on that in my future endeavors. Thank you very much, Professor Karipov, for your report.
Ну, теперь настал мой черед.
Well, now it's my turn, and I would like to present the report submitted by Chair of the Dissertation Board, Galina Gribanova, Doctor of Political Sciences. I'm number 4, so many questions have been asked, many points of criticism mentioned, so I'm not going to read my report in full. Well, speaking about this dissertation, I would like to refer to a non-academic argument, strictly saying. Well, all of us read loads of papers, master and bachelor dissertations, PhD dissertation, and I have only one criteria, whether it is fascinating to read this paper or not fascinating. Well, it was fascinating to read this dissertation because it includes 2 major aspects that fuel interest: relevance and novelty. As for relevance, well, it is clear that Crimean-Tatar community is not an issue of politics. It is rather an issue of international politics, as well as one of the factors impacting the profile of Russia. Speaking about novelty, well, once again, it is a consolidation of historical data, it is personal perception and personal position. However, points of criticism are always there. I would like to focus on the fact that the criticism addressed to the defendant by different members of the dissertation board overall echo one another. Primarily, our criticism refers to the same issues, which means that there is no bias. This is something that is indeed important for you as a young member of the academic community. My first point of criticism is that in the introduction, when you formulate the objectives, you speak not only about the final result achieved, but the process to analyze, to investigate, and the same stands for the theoretical importance. It is just a formal point of criticism, which is just about formulation. However, if you are vague in formulating the objectives, this results in the next point of criticism, that there are no recommendations to Russian Federation bodies or the Crimean Republic government. If you analyze or investigate, this is a process. But what you should ask is, why are you doing that? What do you want to find? So what you need to include is recommendations, evaluations, assessment to be used and implemented in political processes. I should note that in your replies, you have suggested an array of such recommendations. It would be better to have them precisely formulated in your dissertation as well. My second point of criticism, once again, echoes something that has already been said, is that you look into religious and ethnical aspects, overlooking the contribution of social and economic factor to the ethno-political mobilization of the Crimean-Tatar community. Well, this is what makes ethno-confessional conflicts a challenge. The exterior usually unveils real social and economic challenges, including the issue of land. If the issue of land had been resolved according to the demands of the Crimean-Tatar community, then these tensions would be eased out. Well, you see, we cannot judge by this dissertation about the real state of things. How different is the income of Crimean-Tatar community versus other ethnic groups? What about education? I mean, the parameters that largely impact the quality of life and that determine the self-perception and the perception of your own self, not your parents, not your great-grandparents, as victims of some political regime. Regrettably, the dissertation overlooks the issues related to the United Nations resolution on the Crimea. I mean, the international backdrop and the international discussions and the international dialogue versus the tensions in Crimea. The fourth aspect is about Turkey. Well, here I would like to look into a different aspect. Well, it's clear that Turkey is a huge stakeholder impacting the Crimean-Tatar community. However, the politics of Turkey and the policy of Turkey is not something that is not ambiguous. In 2014, the policy of Turkey has undergone huge transformations related to an attempt to perform a coup d'etat in 2016. So your dissertation looks into earlier times. So what I'm curious is whether Turkey has anyhow changed its position since then. Regrettably, your dissertation does not suggest any assessment on how efficient the Tatarstan Republic is in neutralizing and mitigating the Turkish impact. Well, including the visit of the president of Tatarstan Republic to the Crimean Republic, and his meeting with Crimean-Tatar community leaders. So these are my perceptions that I wanted to formulate. Despite the negative points, I believe that your dissertation is a full-fledged research. So the dissertation submitted by Kamil Akhmadeev under the title Crimean-Tatar Community of Modern Russia, the Problem of Self-Determination, is in conformity with the decree as of September 1, 2016, 6821/1 on academic decrees awarding procedure in St. Petersburg State University, whereas Kamil Akhmadeev deserves to be awarded the inspired academic degree in political science in the specialty field 230002, political institutions, processes and technologies. Mr. Akhmadeev, the floor is yours. Distinguished Professor Gribanova, thank you very much for relevant points of criticism and your contribution. I'll do my best to provide my reply to your highly valuable remarks. First remark was about the objectives and the ultimate goals. In particular, that those are not about the final results, but about the process. Yes, indeed, the academic value of any research is identified and is measured by its final results. I take your point. I should have done it differently, rather focusing on the final result, which is basically to formulate new political and academic perceptions of Crimean-Tatar community amid the radical transformations that the Crimean Peninsula has undergone. Thank you very much for this point. As for the next question about my failure to focus on social and economic aspect, well, I absolutely take it as well. Well, as I said earlier, I should have included an elaborate analysis of social and economic position. Despite the analysis of other factors such as external, political, mental, psychological, historical, cultural, social and economic factor today deserves more attention. I would like to reiterate that the subject of my research was not to analyze social and economic factors, strictly speaking. However, it must be there because it has huge impact on ethnopolitical mobilization of ethno-Tatar communities, which is mentioned in the section on the economic traditions and basic characteristics of traditional Crimean-Tatar community, which impacted largely the ethnopolitical mobilization of the community in Soviet and post-Soviet times. However, for the post-Soviet times, I should have analyzed this aspect in more detail, looking into its impact on the ethnopolitical mobilization of Crimean-Tatar community. Once again, Professor Gribanova, thank you so much. I'm going to comply in my future endeavors. Your next question was about the absence of the United Nations resolution. Yes, indeed, the situation is highly painful. It is politicized because the legal status of Crimean Peninsula, according to international law, is ambiguous. There are different positions that are indeed discrete and antagonistic. There are different interpretations in Russian official discourse and the discourse of other countries. Therefore, it is very difficult to use the United Nations resolution as a source. I tried to disembark from the sources that are ambiguous, that have many interpretations, and that could make my research ideologically more biased. Anyway, thank you very much for mentioning this issue, because the United Nations resolution fuels anti-Russian attitudes. The next point was about my particular perceptions of the transformations incurred by Turkey after the attempt of coup d'etat in 2016 in Turkey. Yes, indeed. I analyzed the Turkish factor historically. I tried to analyze the role of Turkey for the political, economic, and social role, as well as humanitarian role for Crimean Tatar community. The coup d'etat and its attempt in 2016 did not exercise any impact on the perceptions of Crimean-Tatar community by the Turkish government. However, the Mejlis and their impact on the coup d'etat was ambiguous. And theoretically, this could be the reason behind the transformed attitudes of the official Turkish government. However, the political establishment is quite stable in its perceptions. The key issue is to ensure territorial integrity of the Ukraine and to provide a platform for those who do not acknowledge the Crimean status quo. However, Ankara has not joined into the sanctions because of the economic impact. As of 2014, the goods turnover between Turkey and Russia was over $33 billion, whereas the income for the budget from Russian tourists was over $44 billion. Before 2014, the bilateral relations were much stronger between Turkey and Russia, which actually determined the ambiguous policy of Turkey towards Crimea and the Crimean-Tatar community. After a short-term vulnerability of Russian-Turkish relations related to the catastrophe with the military plane, the relations have recovered. As for the Turkish factor, well, yes, indeed, I agree with you.
Однако хотелось бы добавить к этому.
I should have considered this factor in greater detail. However, extensive studies of ethnopolitical mobility would compel me to produce a doctorate dissertation, not a candidate dissertation. Your statement about the formulations and the importance of formulations to formulate recommendations to the government of Russia, this would allow us to alleviate the ethnopolitical tensions. Well, this would have made my dissertation more valuable. However, it was very difficult for me to produce such recommendations because the very issue is multifaceted, multi-aspect, and it's a huge challenge. On top of that, we cannot relieve these tensions just by laws. Inter-ethnic harmony in a polyethnic society can be achieved by way of a balance, a very precise balance across all the components that shape such a society, which actually can be done by way of comprehensive multilateral integration of all the stakeholders. Distinguished Professor Gribanova, I have wrapped up my responses. Thank you. I would like to read out the report submitted by the member of the Dissertation Board who is absent today, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the History and Theory of Politics at Lomonosov Moscow State University, Professor Igor Kuznetsov. I'm not going to read out the entire report because it is presented on the St. Petersburg University website. Professor Kuznetsov highlights that this is an integral research that adds our knowledge about one of the most relevant issues of contemporary society. The logic of the dissertation is indeed well done. However, there are some points for criticism, and those are actually the same. First, the social and economic factor is overlooked. No objective data about education economical parameters which invalidates the findings. Second, to make the dissertation ever more justified, it would be practical to address the United Nations resolution as well. The dissertation analyzes the Turkish factor and its impact on ethnopolitical processes. However, to make it more comprehensive, it would be practical to include other international factors as well. Fourth, the dissertation lacks practical recommendations and suggestions for Crimean authorities to relieve the ethnopolitical tensions. These points of criticism do not invalidate the dissertation and its findings. The dissertation by Kamil Akhmadeev is in conformity with the requirements put forward in the Decree 6821/1 as of September 1, 2016 on academic degrees awarding procedure in St. Petersburg State University, where arrested defendant Kamil Akhmadeev deserves to be awarded the aspired academic degree in political science in specialty field 230002, political institutions, processes and technologies. Please be very short, because you have already provided responses. Well, I would like to extend my gratitude to the absent professor as well as for the report. Many of these issues have been considered and addressed to today, and I would like to reiterate my replies. The first question was about my failure to disclose the social and economic factor, and absolutely take this recommendation. I should have included this in my dissertation, although the subject of my dissertation is not the analysis of social and economic factors, strictly saying. However, social and economic factor is justly a factor that exercises huge importance on ethnopolitical mobilizations. The other recommendation was about the United Nations resolution. Once again, the situation is highly politicized and painful, considering the arguments behind the political status of Crimean Peninsula. And here we should consider the events of 2014 and others to follow. Well, please be short. Do not reiterate something that you have said already. We got it. Okay. The next recommendation was about lack of international actors and stakeholders. Well, just the same. A comprehensive analysis of international stakeholders would make my dissertation more valuable. I will consider it in my further endeavors, because it is an extensive issue and includes many aspects. And the last thing was about lack of practical recommendations to public authorities of Crimea. Once again, I have to reiterate that this would make my dissertation better. However, it was very difficult for me to produce such recommendation, because the issue addressed is indeed multifaceted. However, laws or initiatives cannot resolve inter-ethnic harmony. Inter-ethnic harmony is about a comprehensive balance of interests, which in turn requires participation of all the stakeholders in all political processes. Thank you very much, Professor Kuznetsov, for your report. And those present here, does anyone want to take the floor? I see no one wishing to take the floor. Any other comments, recommendations? Would you like to provide any other recommendations? No, you don't want to? Then I would like to give the floor to the research supervisor, Doctor of Political Sciences, Alexander Kurochkin. Distinguished members of the Dissertation Board, distinguished guests. Well, yes, indeed, this is a landmark defense. It is quite, or even not quite, but over-relevant, utterly relevant. The first aspect I would like to note is the choice of topic, which to me is indeed a venture. It's an academic venture. Well, we know many of us would rather avoid some burning issues in terms of their political relevance, their ambiguity, the multiple interpretations by different stakeholders involved in this political process. So this is a highly and utterly acute issue, and a long-term one. This challenge did not emerge in 2014. It dates back to earlier times, and this makes it even more exciting and fascinating. So I would like to note the righteousness, the academic righteousness of the defendant, and a couple of words about the contents. Well, the way the defendant has disclosed this topic is extensive and quite comprehensive. I mean, the dissertation is a success. Well, of course, the defendant failed to embrace the topic which is unembraceable. However, he demonstrated his personal position. I would like to note that the defendant made trips to the Republic of Crimea, doing analysis, talking to representatives of local political elites, which makes this dissertation last for much more than 2 or 3 years. And I think, well, we produced something positive and practical. Well, I would like to highlight the originality and the profound approach, because, well, let's say straightforwardly, most of our postgraduates defending their dissertation rely on some secondary information and choose comfortable topics. Well, here we have a different situation, and we should be happy about that. I extend my gratitude to members of the Dissertation Board for their reports, for their attention, their time, their opinions. Well, I believe that the discussion that we had here was very practical and relevant. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kurochkin. Now let's start the discussion on whether Kamil Akhmadeev should be awarded the academic degree or not. Those who are not members of the dissertation board, please leave this room. Stay near the doors. I think they will be short. The broadcasting is switched off. Well, 5 minutes break. So we resume the meeting. Before we proceed to open voting by name, I would like to clarify that the list of documents is a little bit imprecise. Of course, the candidate exam was passed according to the specialty field 230002, Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies, which is in conformity with the requirements in the specialty field announced at the dissertation, which is certified by a certificate and the minutes of the protocol. Well, now I would like to resume the meeting, and I believe that the broadcasting is there. Does it work well? Yes, it does. Great. So now it is the most decisive minute of our meeting. Now I would like to put on voting the issue on whether to award Kamil Akhmadeev the expired academic degree. Once again, I would like to remind you that the decision is considered legitimate if more than half, but no less than 2/3 of all the members of the dissertation board have voted in favor, according to provision 23 of the academic degrees awarding procedure in St. Petersburg State University, appendix number 1 to the decree. Anna Volkova, your position. The defendant, Kamil Akhmadeev, deserves to be awarded the aspired academic degree, PhD in Political Science, Specialty Field 230002, Political Institutions, Processes, Technologies. Thank you. Member of Dissertation Board, Tatiana Kulakova. I think that Kamil Akhmadeev deserves to be awarded the aspired academic degree, or PhD in Political Science, Specialty Field 230002, Political Institutions, Processes, Technologies. Member of Dissertation Board, Baltash Karipov. The defendant, Kamil Akhmadeev, deserves to be awarded the aspired academic degree, PhD in Political Science, Specialty Field 230002, Political Institutions, Processes, Technologies. Chair of the Dissertation Board, I'm in favor as well. Thus, distinguished members of the Dissertation Board, distinguished colleagues and guests, out of the 4 members of the Dissertation Board present, 4 members of the Dissertation Board voted in favor, no abstentions, no failures and rejections. Therefore, Kamil Akhmadeev deserves to be awarded the aspired academic degree, PhD in Political Science, Specialty Field 230002, Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies. Kamil, your final concluding word. First and foremost, I would like to extend my passionate gratitude to all the members of the Dissertation Board, the Chair, Professor Gribanova, and all the members of the Dissertation Board, all those who are here. My special thank you to my family, my parents, my relatives who have supported me and have revitalized my spirits when working on this dissertation. I also would like to extend my gratitude to my research supervisor, Alexander Kurochkin, for our long-term academic cooperation. It was so exciting, practical, and so valuable. And finally, I would like to tell you that my objective was not to present someone else's interests. Quite the contrary, I would like to draw an extensive focus to the issue which is in the title. I mean, the self-identification, the self-determination problem, as well as the political processes that are so ambiguous. Thank you very much to everyone. Please switch on the microphone. So we congratulate you with this success, and we wish you a lot of success in your further academic endeavors. The dissertation meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for participation. Please switch off the